In the middle of a press conference, Novak Djokovic, the man with 24 Grand Slam titles and arguably the greatest to ever touch a racket, brought everything to a halt to utter her name. He didn't mention Sinner, he didn't mention Alcaraz, he said, Alex Eala. The moment he spoke those words, the entire nation of the Philippines erupted in unison. But there's a crucial detail everyone is missing. This was so much more than just a casual compliment. It was an anointment, a changing of the guard, a public decree from the game's most celebrated champion that a 20-year-old woman from Quezon City had completely altered the meaning of relevance in the sport. Stick with me because when this is over, you'll grasp not only the meaning of Djokovic's words, but also why that statement will shadow Alex Eala for her entire professional life. We begin in Melbourne, Australia, January 2026. The energy at the Australian Open, the year's first Grand Slam tournament, is palpable from the very start. More than 100,000 spectators swarmed the venue on just the opening day, completely smashing every attendance record in the tournament's history. The courts are buzzing and the heat is brutal. And hidden away somewhere in the heart of Melbourne Park, a 20-year-old from the Philippines is getting ready for the single most important match of her nascent career. Her full name is Alex Eala, but everyone knows her as Alex, the 49th ranked player in the world. A graduate of Rafael Nadal's prestigious academy in Mallorca, Spain, she touched down in Melbourne with a burden that statistics and rankings could never capture. She was representing an entire country, a population exceeding 100 million, which for the entirety of the Open era had never seen one of its own women compete in a Grand Slam singles tournament. Just let that fact settle in. The very first Filipina to do so, and she hadn't reached this historic position by some stroke of luck. Her arrival on the big stage happened at the 2025 Miami Open, where she systematically took apart the then world number 2 Iga Świątek, a 6-time Grand Slam winner, on her path to the semifinals. That one match set off a firestorm of passion that swept across all of Southeast Asia. She backed that up by battling through the qualifying rounds to make the final at Eastbourne that June. Then at the 2025 U.S. Open, she carved out another piece of history by being the first Filipino ever to secure a victory in a Grand Slam main draw match during the Open era. Each new accomplishment piled on top of the last like logs on a bonfire. Upon her arrival in Melbourne, the video of her press conference before the tournament had already gathered 175,000 views on the Australian Open's official YouTube channel. In contrast, the clip for world number 1 Aryna Sabalenka sat at 8,000. Carlos Alcaraz had 28,000. Eala had blown past the entire field before a single serve was struck. She had transcended the sport to become a full-blown phenomenon. And the Filipino community in Melbourne, known for being one of the most cohesive, ardent, and sports-mad expatriate groups on the planet, was poised for her arrival. Their flags were ironed, their chants practiced, and their voices ready to roar. This wasn't a simple gathering, it was a complete takeover. The issue at hand was never about whether Alex Eala had a place at the Australian Open. Instead, the question was if the Australian Open itself was prepared for the force of Alex Eala. Here's a hint: it wasn't. Good, because the scene on Court 6 was about to defy not only the conventions of tennis but also cause a massive online stir. This is the moment the narrative takes a turn no one could have predicted. The decision-makers at Tennis Australia placed Alexandra Eala's first match of the tournament on Court 6. It was a moderately sized court, cozy and practical, typically suitable for an initial round match between two players not in the top 50. The problem was, this was not a typical initial round match. The line of people waiting outside Court 6 started to build hours before the match, winding far past the walkway and extending almost to Rod Laver Arena, the crown jewel of Australian tennis venues. Supporters had been there since the sun came up. There were families with their kids, senior citizens wrapped in Philippine flags, and young women sporting Eala jerseys while clutching signs they had made by hand written in Tagalog. They stood patiently in the brutal Melbourne heat, their clothes soaked with sweat, absolutely determined not to lose their spot in the queue. Hundreds of them would never even get through the gate. The venue was simply not big enough. After the gates were shut, the fans who were locked out rushed to the outdoor viewing spots, pushing up against the barriers and stretching to get a view of the massive screens set up around the park. As a result, Filipino supporters watched their champions debut on a low-resolution screen while enduring 30-degree heat, all because not a single person with a clipboard and a master schedule had bothered to consider how many fans would realistically come to see her play. Tennis writer Jose Morgado minced no words. He blasted out a 4-word post on social media that instantly circled the globe. Putting Eala on Court 6 is just dumb. That opinion exploded online. But within the court itself, that completely packed, overcapacity, flag-drenched stadium, the vibe was more intense than anything seen at Melbourne Park in recent memory. There wasn't an empty chair to be found. Spectators were crammed onto the ledge behind the baseline, sitting on the courtside bar that looked over the sideline and packed into standing areas that shouldn't have even existed. The flag of the Philippines was visible, waving from every corner of the stadium. Chants of "Let's go, Alex" came in steady, pulsing waves that never stopped between points. In fact, they only got louder. As the match got underway, the first set felt incredibly fateful, with Eala stunningly winning a marathon opening game against Parks' serve that went on for 20 points. 20 before Parks finally gave up the game on back-to-back overhead smashes. Eala then powered ahead with cool precision, capturing 8 of the following 9 points to build a 3-0 lead. The chanting morphed into a sound that was half stadium-wide roar and half single unified heartbeat. She took the opening set 6-0. It was a complete shutout against her world number 99 opponent, who was unable to perform amidst the overwhelming noise. Court 6 exploded. The celebration that followed was beyond just loud. It was a shockwave. It was audible to people beyond the gates. On the neighboring courts, players actually stopped in the middle of their rallies. The roar ripped across Melbourne Park like a seismic event, making it perfectly clear to everyone that history was being made on that court. The umpire Yulia Inyachenko had to ask for quiet over and over again. It wasn't just 1 or 2 requests. She made numerous pleas, but each one was completely overwhelmed by the noise before it could even be heard. But 20 minutes later, an adjustment from Alycia Parks flipped a switch, leading to the heartbreak of 10,000 Filipinos and igniting a controversy that would rage on long after the match ended. After dropping the first set without securing a single game, Alycia Parks took her seat courtside for the changeover. Her arsenal included 12 potential aces in her serve and a strategic plan that she had yet to deploy. She also possessed something her supporters couldn't give her: inner calm. "My attention was entirely on the spectators during the first set," Parks later confessed, which is why it unfolded like it did. As the second set commenced, a subtle yet significant transformation took place. Parks began to expertly place her first serves targeting the corners and forcing Eala from side to side, a stark contrast to simply enduring attacks on her backhand. An early break allowed her to jump out to a 3-0 lead. The spectators responded, their volume swelling as they urged Eala back to a 3-3 tie. Parks maintained her composure, taking the last 3 games to serve out the set at 6-3, leveling the match at 1 set apiece. The third set was a completely different story. Parks was in command. Eala, who had expended a tremendous amount of physical and mental fuel to achieve that perfect first set, was visibly flagging. Parks converted her chances with brutal efficiency, claiming a 6-2 victory to cap off an incredible comeback. 0-6-6, 3-6-2. Eala managed to save a pair of match points, but it wasn't enough. The audience on Court 6, previously the most boisterous contingent of fans at the tournament, was overcome by a stunned, pained quiet. It wasn't anger or animosity, but sheer devastation. It was the kind of quiet that follows the sudden collapse of something beautiful, leaving only the question of what could have been. Online, however, the quiet lasted for approximately 4 seconds. The debate over fan conduct erupted instantaneously. Tennis purists highlighted that the Filipino fans had been cheering between serves and on Parks' double faults conduct that breaches the unwritten rules for Grand Slam spectators. The umpire's repeated admonitions had gone largely unheeded. Parks mentioned the challenge of competing against a crowd so energized that it felt less like an audience and more like a 12th player. 2 distinct factions emerged with incredible speed. Traditionalists of the sport contended that the atmosphere showed a lack of respect for Parks, for the game's customs, and for fair competition. Supporters from the Philippines retorted that these were fans at their first Grand Slam, celebrating their nation's first ever player in the draw, and their happiness was pure, overpowering, and simply irrepressible. Was it right to subject first-time tennis spectators to behavioral standards that other nations spent decades of Grand Slam attendance learning to adopt? The argument dominated social media for a full 72 hours. All the while, Alycia Parks, having just weathered one of the most challenging crowd environments of her career, walked to the net with elegance. She was greeted with warm applause from spectators who had spent 2 hours hoping she would fail, and she met their gesture with a smile. And Alex Eala, despite the loss, the fatigue, and the cameras fixated on her every reaction, did not leave the court. She signed every single autograph. "It was incredibly touching," she remarked. "That is one of the reasons a defeat like this one feels a bit more difficult. I'm aware that a huge number of people were cheering for me, but the true tremor had not yet been felt. That came 4 days later from the one person nobody thought would comment." By Thursday at the 2026 Australian Open, the Eala saga had expanded well beyond the sports pages. International news agencies that hardly ever covered women's tennis were publishing extensive features. The media in the Philippines had all but transformed into a 24-hour Eala news channel. The controversy over scheduling Court 6, the fans left outside, and the chaotic overflow had thrust Tennis Australia into a spotlight for which its public relations department was ill-prepared. The organization made a public statement on social media recognizing the issue and vowing to explore larger arenas for Eala's future matches, a quiet concession that they had made an error in judgment. But the internet's obsession with this narrative only intensified rather than waned. The question of etiquette persisted. For every person defending the fervent Filipino fans, another insisted that tennis has protocols, sacred unwritten rules of quiet during points, and that these protocols are binding no matter which nation the fans represent. The argument struck a surprisingly deep chord, revealing friction over who defines the culture of tennis, whom the sport has historically catered to, and whether growing its fan base means making concessions to newcomers or requiring their immediate adoption of existing norms. In various interviews, Parks chose her words carefully. She conceded the environment was tough, but she wasn't bothered. Her focus, she said, was just on maintaining her concentration. She also mentioned that the crowd's intensity actually fueled her performance once she learned to embrace it. These were exceptionally frank answers from a player who could have easily adopted a narrative of being wronged. Eala, on the other hand, was working through her own emotional experience. "I'm still young, just 20, and I'm learning to manage this kind of spotlight," she said to the press. "But I'm also thankful for it." For a person of just 20 years, she discussed the historical importance of her being there with astonishing perception. "I'm the only woman from the Philippines in the tournament this year, and I think perhaps the first one ever to be in the main draw, so there are absolutely good things to come away with." A clip of her pre-tournament press engagement soared past 175,000 views and continued to rise. The disparity between Eala's online engagement and that of the world's elite players wasn't closing. It was growing wider by the minute. Something more than a passing trend was taking shape, something with staying power. And in Melbourne Park, a 38-year-old Serbian champion, a 10-time winner of this very event, holding 24 Grand Slam trophies and known as the most successful men's player in history, was taking it all in. He had a few thoughts on the matter, and he was getting ready to voice them. What Novak Djokovic stated next was not just a defense of Alex Eala. It heralded her arrival to the global tennis stage and left everyone utterly speechless. On Thursday, January 23, 2026, Novak Djokovic entered the press room for his media session following a second-round victory against Francesco Maistelli. The scene was familiar. Journalists were gathered, their recording devices were in place, and their questions were ready. The initial questions followed a predictable pattern covering his match, his physical condition, and his ongoing effort to secure a historic 25th Grand Slam title. Then a question arose concerning the issue of overcrowded tennis tournaments, the long lines, and the ensuing chaos. The query also touched on the logistical burden placed on Melbourne Park as attendance figures broke records daily, and whether the massive turnout was becoming a problem that needed a solution. Novak took a moment to think. His eventual answer was something nobody in that room could have predicted. An overflowing crowd at this or any other tennis event is an excellent problem to have. I assure you there are much more serious issues we could be facing. He might have concluded his statement there. It was a more than suitable response, concise, diplomatic, and perfect for a soundbite. But he continued, "I witnessed what happened with Alex Eala the other day. And yes, it has become a topic of conversation, which is understandable. The entire room's attention intensified. We're seeing players emerge from their home countries like she has from the Philippines, which is now a significant presence in the sport." He placed special emphasis on those last four words, a significant presence. Not as a future possibility, but as a current reality. This was a statement made by the man who has claimed more Grand Slam victories than any other person alive. She stands as the most prominent tennis player from that nation, which is a large country, and the level of interest is immense. The emphasis on scale was repeated 3 times, a clear, deliberate, and forceful choice. It was the kind of repetition used by someone determined to ensure his message was understood without any room for misinterpretation. He added, "One could argue that the scheduling might have been suboptimal and that she could have been placed on a more prominent court. Certainly, but on the other hand, she is exceptionally young and is only now breaking through. It's well known that during the opening rounds, the schedule is incredibly tight. The main courts are for the biggest names, and juggling that is a complex task, but as I said, it's a positive challenge to have." What followed was a declaration that instantly silenced any and all critics. "We are seeking more attention for the sport. We desire more people to attend. We want to see more fans watching tennis in person, following the games, and using live streaming services. I find absolutely nothing negative about that. Nothing at all. This assessment came from Novak Djokovic, a player who has competed in every conceivable tennis environment, from facing hostile Australian crowds during his deportation issue to being celebrated by the most reverent Wimbledon spectators in history. His conclusion was firm: the excitement surrounding Alex Eala was not a disruption. It was a blessing to the sport. When his comments reached the Philippines, the public's response was beyond anything that could be easily described. Social media sites buckled under the sheer weight of user traffic. After 4 days of quietly taking in criticism about their crowd's behavior, Filipino fans suddenly had the ultimate defense and endorsement from the greatest champion their nation had ever seen on a tennis court. Eala herself had previously remarked with her usual humility, "I'm not in the same league as the greats like Djokovic, Sabalenka, and Alcaraz. My respect for them is immense." Now, one of those very greats had turned and pointed the spotlight directly on her. The gift he gave her was not a championship trophy. It was not a prize check. It was acknowledgement, the priceless, powerful acknowledgement from the one voice in tennis whose opinion requires no further validation. She is the most prominent tennis player from that nation. At 20 years of age, just 54 weeks into her professional career, Novak Djokovic had already etched her name into the annals of tennis, all before she had even claimed a single Grand Slam. Yet the story's final chapter isn't about what Djokovic proclaimed. It's about what Alex Eala's next actions are and the reasons behind them. That outcome will define everything. Novak Djokovic didn't offer Alex Eala a piece of hardware at the 2026 Australian Open. He offered her something much more uncommon. He lent her his words, his platform, and his official endorsement, a memorial, at a time when the world was still questioning whether she was worthy of the attention she had already captured. She had landed in Melbourne as the first Filipina to ever compete in the Australian Open. She left as the player Novak Djokovic had spoken about without being prompted. In the interim, she filled a stadium beyond its capacity, moved spectators to tears, signed autographs even after a loss, and initiated a worldwide dialogue about identity, culture, and the direction of tennis. That is not a first-round departure. That is a declaration of arrival. Was Djokovic correct to describe the Philippines as a major player in the world of tennis? Or is Alex Eala's fame among fans getting ahead of her performance on the court? Post your thoughts below, because this discussion is a long way from being settled. If this account moved you, click the subscribe button right away, because the story of Alex Eala is only just unfolding, and you will not want to miss what happens next.